Warm welcome to all of you. My name is Dr. Michael Steinke. I'm based at the University of Essex in Colchester, England, and I am involved as the BioYUFE representative of the University of Essex to the UFE Alliance. And today's webinar is a shared webinar between BioYUFE webinar series and the Biocriticism webinar series that's headed by Lilian. Who's going to take over with introductions in a minute. It's on neglected biodiversity in kitchens and fictions. And I want to just give you a bit of background on UFE in itself. UFE is an alliance of European universities who come together to improve the mobility amongst the students. We exchange students on particular modules or specific courses actually as well. And BioYUFE is a grassroots development as part of UFE. So basically a group of people from the different European universities have come together to support biological interest amongst the UFE community, support life science initiatives. And this BioYUFE webinar series basically started about a year ago, and I've been co-organizing this webinar series ever since with Ute Meyer from the University of Bremen. And today, as I said, the BioYUFE webinar is on neglected biodiversity in kitchens and fictions. I briefly introduce you to Marco, who's at the University of Bremen, and to Toyin Joshua Brandt, who's at the University of Groningen. Both of them are with us already. And Lilian is also in the background. She will moderate this webinar for us today. I should point out that this webinar is recorded. We've pressed the recording button already, so everything that you say will be recorded and eventually put onto the UFE YouTube channel, just to have a record of what our activities are really. Following up from this BioYUFE webinar, we've got another hopefully interesting BioYUFE webinar coming up on the 8th of April. On the topic of military ecology, a sad chapter in ecology, I guess. And it's focusing on the war in Ukraine, the impacts on the environment. So we've got two speakers from Ukraine lined up, and that's moderated by Ute at the University of Bremen. And then on the 3rd of June, on the topic of green exercise and mental health. So join us for those webinars if you are interested in both of them. I put a QR code on the slide there for you that will get you to the registration for the military ecology webinar that's happening on the 8th of April. So consider joining us for that. So over to Lilian then, with a few introductory words before we pass over to Marco and Toyin then.
Great, thank you, Michael. Yes, so I'm Lilian Campos, and I direct the research webinar called Biocriticism, and today we're joining forces with BioYUFE. So the Biocriticism webinar examines artistic transformations of biological ideas, biological images, and biological practices. And it also explores critical theory that engages with the life sciences, whether it's with the images, the technologies, or the discourse of the life sciences. I'm going to also briefly announce that the following sessions of the Biocriticism series, since today we have a joint session between BioYUFE and Biocriticism, but then the next ones will be separate. So this is the program for the rest of this term. The theme of Biocriticism this year is biodiversity and neglect. Neglect being examined in all kinds of ways, neglected biodiversity, but also how neglect might actually help or at least develop different forms of biodiversity. So the next two sessions are the ones announced on the screen. There'll be a session on participatory art and science, whether they can help us to see biodiversity on the 25th of April, and a session in May on neglected spaces in poetry and art curation, particularly museum art curation. So for the Biocriticism webinar, you can just visit the website and ask me to join the mailing list. Then I send out the Zoom link, and I also put the Zoom link on the website. Okay, we can shift now to Marco's presentation. I'll just say a few words to introduce Marco. So Marco has carried out work on a large diversity of topics, including the behavior of Drosophila, the chemical ecology of mold fungi, and interactions between arthropods and fungi. Now, he, at the moment, is a professor of chemical ecology at the University of Bremen, and he investigates insect-microbe interactions. He has a working group, and the focus of this working group is how habitat and habitat variations promote or prevent the evolution and co-evolution of microbe management and insect social lives. And Marco is also a biodiversity enthusiast who collaborates with society to promote insects. So as a representative of society here, I thank you, Marco. I'm going to hand over to you. Marco's talk is about caring mothers, the symbiotic relationship between insects and microbes in nurturing their young in your kitchen. And Marco, I think you can share your screen with us.
Yeah, I am trying to share my screen now. Yeah, thank you very much, Lilian, for the introduction. I hope you can hear me and see the screen now, the PowerPoint presentation. Great. Yeah, thank you very much for for this invitation to this very, I guess, interdisciplinary meeting here. Yeah, you already introduced the title of my talk, and when I was kind of about to prepare that the slides for this presentation, I thought, well, parts of it might be a bit boring and not provocative enough for this kind of webinar. Let's see. So I expanded a bit the topic to and focus a bit more about insect behavior. Before I'm coming to the insects. I'm starting. Okay, not yet. Starting with this. Picture. This is an image of my daughter, an old image of my daughter. She's now 21, and I am quite fascinated by this picture, not because it's my daughter. And yeah, I try to make a link between this image and the content and the insects I'm going to talk about. So when you look at that image, you may see a quite relaxed baby looking at the photographer. That was me in this case, quite skeptical. What is he? Is he? I know him. Perhaps at that age, she might have known me already or recognized me as her father. And maybe she was wondering what kind of weird device is he holding in front of his face. At that time, it was a photo apparatus. And at the same time, she looks also quite relaxed, not stressed at all. And this is, of course, because she's been held by her mother, who's caring very much for her. And I think, as I already said, this image is for me quite emotional. Maybe for others, these kind of images, or for those of you who have kids as well, those images or those relationships are very, very emotional. And I'd like to ask the provocative question today: do insects also have parental emotions? So I can right away disappoint you. I'm not going to answer this question, but I will guide you to some aspect that may, at least justify this question. But for a moment, let's stay with us, with humans, and before we come to microbes and their interaction with insects, I would like to refer to we are ever is familiar with, that is play. Play can come in many different forms. We can find this throughout our lifetime. We play as kids and as adults and as older people. Of course, playing, the activity or the intensity of play decreases with increasing age, but play is still something you can find everywhere. Play, like in the upper right image, can be kind of satisfactory. You can play as individuals on your own, or you play together with others. So it's a social event. And in most of the images, you can see that play apparently is fun. It comes with very positive emotions. And indeed, there is, of course, a definition of play, different aspects that relate or define play. This is not for reading. But there are things like maybe, and that's important for play, there is a lack of a specific function. Play is not related to any reward in terms of food, shelter, mating, or something. It often involves unusual behaviors, repeated patterns, and it's often performed in a relaxed, so not stressful environment. And what I found most important is that play is involves voluntary activities and behaviors. It's often spontaneous, and it's rewarding in itself. And this comes, I guess everyone would agree, with some pleasure and fun when we play. This image perhaps was taken at a ball pit at an IKEA store. So adults and kids play with balls. This is a link to something you could perhaps find in this ball pit. But the point I would like to make here is that insects love to play with balls as well. And some of you might have heard about some recent studies that bumblebees play with balls. This is a video showing how a bumblebee voluntarily, it's not being forced, it's not being rewarded doing this. They even have the choice between different chambers where they could find food or have the opportunity to do something like or interact with these non-living living objects. And in this study, the researchers could observe, you can see the bumblebees are labeled, so they could distinguish individuals regarding their behavior. They do this several dozens of times, sometimes hundreds of times. They repeat this ball rolling behavior. And after a couple of times, when they made this experience with these chambers where they could apparently play, and then given the opportunity to choose color-coded chambers in which they could again repeat this playing or receive food, most of these bumblebees choose the chamber where they could again perform this play or at least interact with these objects. It's important to mention here that the bumblebees were kept in a stress and not in a relaxed environment. It wasn't stressful at all. They were not starving, so that's why they were perhaps not necessarily interested in the chamber where they could find potential food. So they had the chance to just do something different than searching for food. The authors of these studies interpreted this very complex behaviors, which they described in detail in these publications, as play, because it fulfills several of the definitions. And it seems as they did that voluntarily again and again and again, they seem to feel or perceive some sort of satisfaction or maybe even just fun. This is a super fascinating aspect. If you want to learn more about this, I can just recommend this book by Lars Chitka, The Mind of a Bee. Play often comes also with some more extreme forms like things associated with, for instance, bungee jumping. And maybe we differ in whether we would like to do this as well. Some of us, maybe some of you already did it. I don't think I'm gonna do it. But some are sensation seekers, right? They want extreme forms of play and also feel extreme forms of pleasure and fun. And now we come to an insect that we can indeed find in our kitchen, namely the fruit fly Drosophila melanogaster, or vinegar fly. In this very recently published paper, the authors observed a similar behavior like the authors of the bumblebee paper. They offered adult fruit flies, the opportunity to enter a merry-go-round and just take several rounds on that carousel. And they observed within a population of flies, many individuals voluntarily, again, entering these carousel, take several rounds, then leave and go back and do it again. Like if you were perhaps skeptical about bungee jumping and you did it the first time, and then you perhaps kind of get addicted to it and you need to do it again and again. Interestingly, there was also a part of the population that were kind of reluctant doing that. They apparently didn't like making this experience on that merry-go-round, and the authors could also assign that to some genetic variation in the fruit fly population. So the point I'd like to make here is that those so different insects seem to be engaged in some sort of behaviors that fulfill several definitions of play. So now let's come to the actual topic, namely interaction with microbes. So I'm going to show you again a video of fruit flies. So fruit flies, as the name implies, and this is why they are also annoying to us, they lay their eggs into ripening fruit, and then the fruit is rotting. We can't consume it anymore, not because the fly larvae feed inside, but they bring microbes that spread in these fruits and cause this rotting process. And again, then we are not interested in that anymore. And this transmission of microbes is related to reproductive behavior of the fly. So here you can see a cherry and a couple of flies here in the front, and in the middle, a fly sitting on that fruit. And during the video, you will see how the fruit fly bends. It's a female that bends her abdomen towards the surface of the fruit, and she tries to drill a hole, penetrate the skin, and then she inserts an egg. So I'm starting the video. We will zoom in. So here you can see, those of you who are not familiar with the anatomy of such an insect. So here in the front you can see these reddish part. That's the head and the eyes. Then there's the thorax. These are the wings. That's the abdomen, which is bent towards the fruit. And you can see that, here you can see how she's trying with her kind of ovipositor, creating an opening into the fruit. And now she is laying the egg. Yep. So the egg is now inside the fruit. You can perhaps see this tiny little whitish thing sticking out of this hole she drilled. This is a filament that belongs to the egg. And now what one perhaps would expect as a human, the flies goes away, try to infest another oviposit into another fruit. And indeed, at the very beginning, this seems to be the case. But then you can observe something very interesting. Now she moves away, and maybe she's going away, flying away. And now she comes back. Look what she's doing. She deposits. You might have seen that. Have you seen that? Maybe again. She deposits from her anus fecal material close to the oviposition sites. And what is then happening in the next couple of hours, the embryo develops in the egg, the larva emerges from the egg, and the larva then will get in touch with the microbes, take up the microbes, will drag the microbes into the fruit, and the microbes that are still alive, coming from the gut system of the adult, from the mother fly, will then start proliferating in the fruit, which is absolutely essential for the developmental success of the larvae, because the fruit mostly consists of water and sugar. So these are not the ingredients a heterotrophic organism like a fly or even us would grow from. They need amino acids, they need other essential nutrients, which they won't find in a fruit, but they will be synthesized during growth of the microbes, by the microbes. And this is what the larvae then consume. So the larvae, the flies, the insects, together with the microbes, create an environment in which the larvae can then develop. So this is some basic form of parental, or in this case, maternal care provided by the flies. Okay, this is another insect you may find in your kitchen or in your house or flat. That's an earwig. And they have, as you can see, so this is the adult. I don't know, I'm not too familiar with these insects, but Joël Mounier, he's very much into the evolution of these earwigs. It might be a female or a male, and you can see they sit on this animal sits on top of their babies. So it's a quite large family. It's a couple of dozens of animals they keep together. And as any animal, including us, everyone knows more or less, we need the microbes on our epithelia, in particular our gut system. And here again, it's fecal material that is deposited by the adult earwigs. The baby earwigs then take up and consume. And a recent finding shows that feeding on the fecal material not only provides the essential nutrients and a good kind of microbial starter pack for their adult life then, but this also leads to group cohesion or family cohesion. So the individuals in such a family are kept together through feeding on their own fecal material. This is another nice image of the earwigs. So that this looks a bit brutal, as if this adult animal would feed on the baby animal, but it's like a mother dog carrying her pups, which try to escape. This is what the earwigs do as well. So on very different levels, using their very complex behaviors, they very much care for their young. I'd like to show you another and last example of an insect you definitely won't find in your kitchen. What you can see here, this big beetle is a burrowing beetle. The burrowing beetles, the adults are attracted to any kind of dead, often vertebrate, like dead mice, for example. And what the animals do, and this is what the name implies, they bury, for instance, a dead mouse. So they by doing this, they secure it for their own use. And what they then do below ground is they process the dead piece of meat, so to say, in many different ways, and they lay their eggs. And from these eggs, like in the flies or the earwigs, the young emerge, which you can see there aggregating on top of this processed dead mouse. But what I would like to focus your attention to is what is going on here between the adult beetle and this baby larva. So what they seem to do is they are kissing, right? So the mother or father beetle, I don't know, is bending his or her head towards this beetle larva. And the beetle larva indeed can show some sort of begging behavior, which stimulates the adults to behave in a particular way. And what is happening here is not necessarily that they provide any food to their baby larvae, because the piece of mouse meat around the larva is actually the actual food for them, but they regurgitate liquids from their gut system, which contains microorganisms. So they directly provide microbes to their offspring. And again, so this is how it looks like in more detail. And we know this behavior from ourselves as well, right? There is something like kiss feeding. It's perhaps not that much or that often practiced anymore in Western societies, and maybe not that directly as shown in this image, but parents tend to perhaps pre-chew well, perhaps difficult to chew for the little baby piece of food, and then it's given by using a spoon or something like that. And of course, it has something to do with pre-processing, pre-chewing food. But what is happening here as well is microbes are transmitted from the parent to the offspring that then colonize the oral cavity and the gut system. And such behaviors, amongst others, are crucial for the development of a healthy so-called microbiome. Okay, I'd like to briefly sum that up. These were the examples I just showed you regarding maternal care or parental care and the role of microbes in this parental care, and behaviors that seem to relate to something we would consider fun or enjoying, something like having fun playing games or enjoying sensation. And insects show human-like parental care. And as I said, the microbes here have an important role. So that all those behaviors and interaction might have even evolved or had been present in common ancestors before actually vertebrates or animals split into vertebrates and invertebrates. So that those components of behaviors have evolved in very different animal lineages. And given that, even though we can't, of course, ask beetles, earwigs, bumblebees, or fruit flies whether they really have emotions towards their baby offspring, or indeed feel something like fun when they play, I think it's reasonable to ask the following question instead of asking whether they have it. like parental emotions, why shouldn't insects experience parental emotions as well? I mean, we will see what the upcoming research on all these topics will show us, but already now, I think we know enough that we should actually perceive and also treat insects differently than we are used to do it. So that's my input to this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marco. That was a fascinating presentation, and it really, for the lay person that I am, draws my attention away from what I imagine usually when people talk about biodiversity, which is on a different scale and much more charismatic animals and so on. So it's really great to displace our attention towards these less charismatic animals, but also towards the different scales at which biodiversity exists, and in fact exists through the interdependence of different scales of life. So here the microbes and the insects. So this is great, and I think your questions will certainly bring us to discuss with
I hope so.
enthusiasm. What we'll do is we will go straight into Toyn's talk and place all the questions at the end. But as Michael has suggested, please don't hesitate to write things in the chat, everyone. Also, if you just want to remember the question you have now and not forget it in 20 minutes. So don't hesitate to use the chat already. And we're going to move on to Toyn Joshua. Toyn Joshua Brandt is a PhD researcher, and his research explores the intersection of biology and literature. He's particularly interested on narratives of health, bodies, and microbial worlds. Toyn Joshua is involved in an interfaculty project on biological individuality and literary characters. And this project merges the philosophy of biology with literary theory. In addition to the PhD research that he's carrying out, Toyn Joshua also convenes the Environmental Humanities Network at the University of Groningen, and he teaches courses on pandemic narrative and on the non-human other. So Toyn Joshua, please share your screen. Toyn Joshua's talk is called Save the Unseen, Microbial Tricksters in Science Fiction.
Great, thank you so much for the invitation and for the. Do you see my presentation? Yes, I will move to my presenter view. So if you don't see any slides moving, please let me know that I'm failing at technological things. That was a fun presentation. Thank you so much, Marco. I have a lot of questions, but I will leave them for the discussion and continue with my presentation. Yes. So this is Loki's castle. And Loki, as scientists found out, lives apparently at the depth of 2,500 meters on the mid-Atlantic ridge between Iceland and Svalbard. You should see a map now. And his castle is made up of 5 black chimneys that spew out this superheated water. And for those who've never been to the deep sea, like me, black smokers, also known as these hydrothermal vents, are fissures on the seafloor that release geothermally heated water. And now we all have been tricked by popular culture into thinking that Loki looks like this. This is not true. This is how Loki really looks. And here's a more abstract drawing of Loki. And here's a depiction of Loki cutting off a branch of the Tree of Life. In this article, Tracy Watson writes that Loki stirs trouble and insults other gods. He is elusive, anarchic, and ambiguous. But Loki is not singular, Lokis are many. They evaded human perception, apparently, until 2015, after their identification in a metagenomic analysis of a mid-oceanic sediment sample. With the details, I will not bore you. And some of you might have seen the Disney Plus TV series Loki, where, sorry for the spoiler alert, in the season 2 finale, Loki turns into Yggdrasil, so the world tree from the Norse mythology. And here he's gathering up the various threads of time, imbuing them with new life, dragging these time scales across an invisible platform to a golden throne, very dramatic, wrapping these evolutionary timelines, we might say, around himself. And I think this popular culture depiction of Loki is pretty accurate. And even though we gave him a human face, the real world Lokis, the Loki Archaeota, as they're also called, are definitely the tricksters of evolutionary timescales, troubling the trees that we have drawn, well, not me, but the many people working on evolutionary trees have drawn for centuries. And studies suggest that the Loki Archaeota stand at the branching point. Where exactly is much of a debate. I don't know exactly, but at the branching point where bacteria and archaea diverge and eukaryotes emerge. So eukaryotes, the nucleated, most multicellular life, like as humans. In other words, they might be the missing link between us, eukaryotes, and prokaryotes, that other unseen majority of life that we often casually forget in our interpretation of the world around us. I am looking at you, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, still lacking a category here in the red list. These Lokis thus also once again remind us of the vast world that in our daily lives, at least, despite their significance, often goes unnoticed, microbes. And as Maureen O'Malley writes in her book on the philosophy of microbiology, most biodiversity on Earth is and always has been microbial, regardless of, and this is important, the greater visibility of animals and plants, even more important, despite many differences in how biodiversity is calculated. Because when it comes to microbes, things get complicated. Now, as you might have noticed, I blended some scientific developments with Greek mythology. In my defense, I didn't start this game. It was the scientists who discovered Loki and his castle and named them as such. I'm just observing the story and I like it very much. What I will talk about today is first why microbes steer some things up, why they are thus justifiably called Lokis of the living world, biologists tricks the figures, and three, that whereas microbes usually, and I quote Ursula Heise here, do not fit into our narratives, except as villains we are glad to rid ourselves of. This figuration of microbes as tricksters tells a better story. Now I make the case for the latter through some examples of science fiction literature showing how microbes in these stories act as trickster figures that disrupt the kind of ontological security of the initial exposition of the story. And by doing so, marking a plot of trickery, where these belief systems of characters or readers, depending on how we approach this question, how they are questioned or turned upside down. And sometimes this results in some sense of closure. So an ending, a good or bad ending, a resolution of things going on, that is in most cases microscopic and or symbiotic. But more on this later. First, why does all of this matter? Aside from the obvious reasons, or obvious reason that it is very interesting, I think, and important to analyze the epistemic power of these kind of stories by which we narrate a scientific discovery like the Lokis and their castle. There is also present urgency, I think, to rethink, reframe, and re-narrate our visions of life in the face of the current mass extinction due to the anthropogenic destruction of habitats like the deep sea. Narratives are not merely descriptive, or not always not merely descriptive, but they are constitutive. They shape, for example, the actions we take towards environmental preservation. So to illustrate this, let's return to Loki's castle. In 2024, the Norwegian parliament voted in favor of allowing exploration for seabed minerals in their exclusive economic zone. And this map here shows the planet's mining area in yellow. This is, let me see, where the Lokis live. So on the edge of the plant mining area. And while they will most likely not mine the castle, but rather the abyssal plains a bit further out, there are many unknowns about the impact that these mining operations will have on nearby ecosystems, and current research at least indicates that deep sea mining might significantly affect deep sea ecosystems, but also the more upper, more sunlit zones, for example, due to the sediment plumes that mining vessels cause. But this is still a big unknown. This is just what current ongoing research is suggesting. And more than that, abyssal plains are not marine deserts. They just do not have the physical appeal of a biodiverse jungle. Instead, recent discoveries are gradually reshaping our perspective on abyssal plains, revealing, quote, higher than expected species richness and heterogeneity, serving as significant contributors to essential ecosystem services. This is how an abyssal plain looks like. So a key factor sustaining the narrative of deep sea deserts, and thus fueling, this is important, the greenwashing argument that not too much will be lost when interfering in these environments compared to terrestrial mining operations, which is a greenwashing argument often made by mining corporations, unfortunately, is that the majority of life in these abyssal plains is microbial, remaining hidden in plain sight. They lack what Scott Atran calls phenomenal resolution. They too easily elude the human imagination. We know they are there, but we casually forget about it. This is a case where it becomes quite apparent how narratives might be consequential, how they might transform into reality even before they fully take hold as part of a historical vernacular, like the deep sea is a place full of gigantic deep sea monsters or something. So whereas the Loki Archaeoda, the deep sea tricksters living in Loki's castle, somewhere in the exclusive economic zone of Norway, the newest kingdom apparently, remind us once more of our microbial companions and their significance. The irony will here that precisely because our biased experience of the world that renders these microbes at the margins of our imagination, these Lokis might see an end to their thriving castle's community. Now this is, of course, a case study for a much wider problem that has been discussed by many. For example, as Coral writes here, conservation of the visible life we know and love, including ourselves, will require the conservation of microorganisms. Also considering the term that is co-extinction. So some species might have this cascade effect of co-extinction, and this also applies to microbes, symbionts, etc. Microorganisms are intrinsic to the maintenance of plant, animal, and fungal biodiversity. Maureen O'Malley resonates here, writing that the value we attach to macroorganismal diversity relies largely on microorganismal biodiversity, but despite this relationship, it is very rare to hear much said about microbial conservation. I really like this phrasing by Ursula Heiser, who writes that, as is obvious to anyone who's seen or bought one of the innumerable commodities that revolve around endangered species, or who has watched documentaries, read books, or attended lectures about the extinction crisis, the species that are usually selected to signal the crisis tend to belong to a fairly narrow set, namely taxa such as worms, crabs, fungi, and bacteria. I think this is the gliding scale, usually remain invisible. Here is the red list again with the gap, the major gap. I mean, if we compare this image to, did I include it in the presentation? Never mind. The phylogenetic tree, for example, there is a wide discrepancy. Heise exemplifies also her argument with the list of the conservation of nature, this list, the red list. But she uses the 2008 edition where still no fungi were even listed. So there is progress, still missing out. For the sake of keeping this presentation short and to the point, that's not my specialty. I will not detail the whole discussion on microbial conservation, but instead turn to interesting novels. I list some major voices here in this slide for anyone interested, but quickly continue to science fiction. For example, Ned Bowman's Phenomenous Lumpsucker, published in 2022, which is a satire of the current extinction crisis, but also of current extinction discourse and politics. And this taxonomic bias that renders microbes at the fringes is also satirically explored throughout the novel, for example, through the figure of Raisin, who reflects that after all, the vast majority of animals on Earth were extreme parochial parasites. Nobody gave a shit about any of those. Sorry for my words. When the World Conservation and Species Exemption had resolved early on to exempt all such microscopic parasites from its purview, essentially rendering them non-persons, not even the most radical Greens had so much as muttered in protest. There is also the figure of Mark Halyard. I will not give you all the details, but he at a certain point in a discussion rhetorically asks, if a species position with respect to us doesn't matter, you know, those amoeba they found that live at the bottom at the Mariana Trench, if they are just as important as my parents' dog, even though nobody ever gets anywhere near them, then where does that get us? And I think it's an interesting question, especially for the deep ecologists with us, especially given also the important biogeochemical function of some deep sea microorganisms, in contrast, I'm sorry, Mark, to your parents' dog, who doesn't fulfill a lot of biogeochemical functions for the functioning of the Earth system. And we can, of course, make it even more provocative, as Curtis does here, writing that I make no apologies for putting microorganisms on a pedestal above all other living things. For if the last blue whale choked to death or the last panda, it would be disastrous, but not the end of the world. But if we accidentally poisoned the last 2 species of ammonia oxidizers, that would be another matter. It could be happening now, and we wouldn't even know. So I think it goes without saying at this point that microbes trouble things, that they turn things upside down, for example, by challenging the traditional tree of life or by destabilizing the way that we value certain species in relation to ourselves, like when we compare the last species of ammonia oxidizers with our own pets. They are, we might say, real-life trickster figures of the story of life. I think this figuration of microbes holds up quite strongly. We might turn to the book Trickster Makes This World by Lewis Hyde, who examines the role of trickster. I think this is one of the better better literature on trickster figures, because he's not trying to offer a comprehensive universal theory of trickster figures across history and across cultures. Instead, he writes that he makes a list, and he takes this list as a kind of comparison to compare stories, see how they differ from each other, etc. So some of these points I have listed here on the slide. First things first, tricksters are regularly honored as the creators of culture. They have helped shape this world so as to make it a hospital place for human life. I think when we think of the word microbes too, very generally speaking, nutrient cycling, oxygen production, decomposition, climate regulation, in lesser terms, we can easily say they make our planet hospital for human life. Point number 2, a trickster always resides at the gates of life, making sure there is commerce. And indeed, we might say microbes are the unseen brokers of life's chemical commerce. They occupy this threshold between life and non-life, acting as the, quote, gatekeepers here of the biotic and abiotic. Continuing, Hyde writes, tricksters attend the internal boundaries by which groups articulate their social life, cross the line, confuse the distinction. Well, microbes confuse the idea of fixed evolutionary lineages by swapping genetic material across species boundaries. They trouble our idea of an bounded individual or bounded self. We might say our very identity is microbial. The human body hosts more microbial cells than human cells, questioning what the human is, steering this whole debate in the philosophy of biology on biological individuality. Now I could go on endlessly here. Actually, there are many more examples Lewis Hyde offers us, but I want to end with the most obvious one here, which is that tricksters evade visibility. They trick, confuse, disguise their own form. Now that microbes evade perception is of course obvious, but that they do sometimes do so actively is maybe also interesting to look closer into. For example, with, I'm definitely pronouncing this wrong, Trypanosoma brucei, the protozoan that causes the African sleeping sickness, about which Lewis Hyde writes the following, and I'm quoting him here, sorry, I forgot about including it in the slide, but he's writing that once the invader is detected, the victim's immune system fights back with a single weapon at its command. It produces antibodies specific to the shape of this intruder's skin or outer protein coat. But this microbe can change its skin into as many as 1,000 shapes, and the immune system never catches up. Each time it produces an antibody specific to anyone's skin, brucei drops that skin and produces another from its enormous wardrobe. I think this is a quite good story. Now, this whole figuration of microbes as tricksters is, of course, not to uncover any real nature of microbes. It's not discovering an ontological truth or something. Much like the trickster archetype, and I'm speaking with Lewis Hyde here, should not be used to uncover any real nature of stories, any universal characteristic of storytelling. Rather, and Hyde writes, the coincidences are fruitful. They make us think and see again, or maybe make us think and look closer, especially when it comes to microbes. Now, let me see. Yeah, I can shortly mention this as well. So there's another reason why I like tricksters, because it's the archetype that attacks all archetypes. So he's the character in myth who threatens to take the myth apart. He is the eternal state of mind, Hyde writes, that is suspicious of all eternals, dragging them from their heavenly preserves to see how they, quote, fare down here in this time-haunted world. As a cultural scholar working on cultures of science, I feel this is maybe the right pattern here. The archetype that attacks all archetypes, that destroys the myth in science, and as Mary Midgley reminded us, far from being the opposite of science, myth remains a central part of it. But to move to the interesting part, archetypes are timeless, novels are time-haunted. We should really go into the interesting worlds of science fiction now. And start with John Snochevsky's 1998 novel, The Children's Star, which reads as an analogy for the growing awareness of microbial life significance and its consequences for our modes of thinking. So in short, very short summary, the story unfolds on a different exoplanet, Procyon, a newly discovered exoplanet named for its exclusively prokaryotic multicellular life that thrives on arsenic. And when this interstellar corporation proposes terraforming Procyon to make it habitable for humans, the native life will likely be wiped out. So, under the laws of default, this multiplanetary political union, this is permissible only if no sentient life exists. So a large portion of the plot circles around the quest to find sentient life. But initially, they see nothing that fits any human expectations of sentient life or intelligent life or whatsoever. Then there are the tumble rounds. These are these human-sized life forms that shape like collapsed truck tires. They don't appear sentient or intelligent at all. They are these plant-animal hybrids, so in some sense also kind of trickster figures. They are mostly grazing cow-like creatures, but in the course of the story, they display unpredictable behavior, hinting at being more than they seem. And then comes the turning point, the eureka moment, that is the discovery of the microzoids, microscopic organisms living apparently in close symbiosis with these tumble rounds. And as the protagonist scientists study these microzoids, some become infected and begin experiencing hallucinations, fearful then of contamination. Some demand the planet's immediate terraforming, because, as they argue, the source of infection needs to be destroyed. Other humans push back, well, to destroy a world before you understand it, such impatience, how typical of humans. And the story, of course, echoes real-world debates on microbial conservation. For example, the deep ecology argument that all life forms have intrinsic value, given that this would also apply to the parasites we humans would love to get rid of, like the malaria parasites. I think that's a very welcome member of the red list. Or consider the discussed taxonomic bias. The scientists fail to recognize the unseen majority of prokaryon, these microscopic beings that apparently, as the scientists find out, regulates the planet's environment, shaping weather conditions ideal for prokaryon life, and ultimately they even form these symbiotic relationships with human colonizers, being able to transform the human bodies to survive on this planet. So the bioengineering plot twist at the end. I will fly across some works of science fiction. I'm very sorry about this, but I think the goal is to outline some common characteristics, what the function of microbes have in these kind of stories. So Sloane Chesky's novel parallels Frank Schätzing's 2004 novel The Swarm, where the scientist protagonists struggle to make sense of this kind of series of separate, seemingly connected events. Killer whale attack ships, methane-eating worms proliferate, they're destabilizing the methane deposits on the deep sea, and on land, the white crabs cause chaos. Then at most sites of havoc, there are some particular sightings made of a bioluminescent organism that is, quote, flat and shapeless. Then after pursuing various lines of research in vain, the scientists eventually realized that its apparent formlessness might in fact reveal the phenomenon's true form. Rather than being a single entity, it functions as a collective bacteria, acting together in a coordinated matter like a swarm. A eureka moment, again. They are single-cell organisms. They are a network of unicellular beings. They are this enormous confederation of luminescent microbes that apparently, so goes the theory, haunt humanity from the depths of the ocean, seeking revenge. So it's in the end also a story of revenge, seeking revenge given the anthropogenic destruction of their habitat. And this point in the novel marks the turning point in the plot for the scientists struggle how they need to deal with this microbial antagonist, which is unseen, thus far unknown, and completely alien to their knowledge systems. And they have to get out of their comfort world. They have to transcend these kind of world boundaries, adopt a new ontological perspective. And the last part of the novel is dedicated to something that I would call ontological shift. So where ontological securities move into insecurities. For example, one scientist travels to the deep sea in this, vessel with a mission to disperse pheromones carrying a message of peace to the microbial swarm-like organism. And with every meter she descends, she immerses herself into a new perspective on life. And there is this increasing loss of familiar perceptions, of the feelings derived from human senses. And finally, when all these cognitive biases are literally and metaphorically submerged, she wakes up to a new ontological landscape, seeing, quote, spores, bacteria, and viruses that form chains of organic matter, chains of which humans are a part. And I would say that in both works, then these fictional microbial figures, they act as trickster figures, classic trickster figures, because they destabilize the ontological security of the story's exposition. They mark a shift toward recognizing the unseen majority of life, a shift that I would call, it's an ontological shift, but for the characters, it's kind of microscopic revelation, an anagnorisis, to stay with Greek mythology, namely referring to that moment in a narrative when a character makes this critical discovery about the world, about the state he is in. This shift from ignorance to knowledge, seeing the true turn of events kind of laid bare, which is in this case, the true turn of events is the discovery of microscopic life and its significance for other forms of life. So we go deeper into the argument. But this destabilization of ontological security, that state in which individuals or characters feel confident in their understanding of existence and their place within it, based on the fundamental human categories of being, like self, non-self, may also lead to this increasing crisis of ontological insecurity. And this sometimes does not offer really the resolution that agnosis usually does. Instead, it can also further immerse the character and our reader into the uncanny landscapes of microscopic and/or symbiotic relations and dynamics. And I want to end with this really great novel by Jeff Vandermeer, which is definitely a case of well, it's a weird fiction, and a very short summary. So during their expedition into this mysterious cordon of territory of Area X, the scientist protagonists of the story, they discover this tunnel. There is some discussion whether it's really a tunnel, but they discover this text inscribed on its walls made by apparently a microbial life form. As the main protagonist notes, it's probably a type of fungi or other eukaryotic microscopic organism. And then the main protagonist does something that you shouldn't, apparently. I leaned in closer, she writes, like a fool. She is the narrator, and she writes a diary, so she writes this. I leaned in closer like a fool, like someone who had not had months of survival training or ever studied biology. Someone tricked into thinking that words should be read. And she is tricked indeed, as a nodule in the W chose that moment to burst open and a tiny spray of golden spores spewed out. I pulled back, but I thought I had felt something enter my nose. Then the spores which I had inhaled, she writes, she continues, they point to a truthful seeing, she writes. Whereas the psychologist, one of the other members of this expedition team that goes into Area X, had hypnotized all the members of the expedition, the spores that she inhales make her resistant to this hypnotic suggestion. So she finally can see the things as they really are, apparently. But this does not mean that what she sees makes any sense to her, or that she is a reliable narrator for that matter. When analyzing the samples of the fungi-like organism that infected her, for example, she notes that it looks astonishingly human. I kept squinting through the microscope lens and raising my head and squinting again as if I couldn't see the sample correctly. Then I settled down and stared at it until it became just a series of squiggles and circles. Was it really human? Was it pretending to be human? Like the African sleeping sickness? Is it like changing form constantly when I was looking? And she gets a bit paranoid because first, she was convinced that when I wasn't looking at them, these cells became something else, that the very act of observation changed everything. So the microbial cells trick their observer, shapeshift, evade perception, like Hyde's archetypal trickster. And about this novel, Vandermeer tells in an interview that he tried to convey the idea that the world is much stranger than we usually recognize, that we understand less of the world than our brains trick us into believing. And again, trickery is the key word here. I guess to round things up, this is precisely the humbling quality of a trickster figure, or to read a work of science fiction or biology for that matter, through these kind of archetypes. Because these tricksters disturb the established categories of intuitive ontology. They open the road to possible new worlds, to possible new ways of seeing or thinking. And I want to end with this. So in the epilogue of The Swarm, the novel The Swarm, one of the scientists' protagonists, one of the survivors of the story, tells us readers the following. She says, the ear, it's the microorganismal creature, that they didn't merely destroy our cities, they laid waste to us internally. But she noticed a new kind of seeing emerges. The microbial tricksters turn things upside down, and she remarks, people are learning to grasp the diversity of nature and to sweep the hierarchies and see the real connections. After all, the connections are what are keeping us alive. And I must say, I really like this very kitschy, holist ending to the story, because it remains very human-centric. It's, in the end, it's what is keeping us alive. It's all about this. But what that means might radically change. So there is no transcendental view from nowhere, no intrinsic value. It's all about us. But what that means might change in the course, or I must say plot, of microbial trickery that we find ourselves entangled in. Thank you very much. I will leave it there.
Thank you so much, Toyn. Excellent presentation again, and a lot of fascinating food for thought. I have a million questions, and I'm going to be altruistic and open up the discussion so that other people can ask their questions. I haven't seen any questions yet in the chat. Yes, wait a minute. Actually, one has appeared. So Massi Zekavat is asking a question. This is for Toyn. Can you see the question? Should I read it out, Toyn? It just appeared in the chat. Given that narratives addressing more than human life inevitably rely on anthropomorphism, such as trickster figures, to render material agency intelligible, how might scholars and creative artists critically navigate the inherent tension between leveraging such tropes for relatability and inadvertently reinscribing anthropocentric frameworks? Specifically, what methodologies, narrative strategies, or theoretical prisms could enable the articulation of material agency in a way that resists centering human subjectivity, but still fosters ethical and affective engagement with non-human actors?
That's a great question. Thanks so much, Massi. Well, as much as we might like to destroy scientific myths, there is no way around the fact that there is that narrative permeates scientific knowledge-making practices in different ways. And there's, of course, a lot of discussion how exactly and in which parts of scientific knowledge-making they permeate, but they are there. And this is partly blamed on the fact that we are storytelling animals, as many have pointed out, and that narrative is one of the main modes that we make sense of the world. And I think this is just important to acknowledge, and based from that, not to destroy narrative or say we need to get rid of narrative in science at all. Maybe there are some cases where this is a viable critique, but in most cases, narrative is there and will stay and it will be there with us. So how then to narrate the stories of life in accordance with current scientific paradigms? Maybe narratives need to be updated, etc., etc. So this is where your question is heading, I think. As I argued, I think the trickster is a viable archetype to make sense of many things, partly because it's a very open-ended archetype. It's not it doesn't close any discussions, but instead open up. It makes us look at the ambiguities in the ontologies by which we read natural worlds. Maybe they be scientific, theoretical, or intuitive, like common sense, like the taxonomic bias that I've discussed today. And precisely because of this, they are useful. So when the scientists story their research as they are the Loki Archaeota, they live in this castle in the deep sea, I think this is a very viable way of storing the very important science that they do. And it's also it makes a good story that has worked. I mean, the Nature article is one of the best read articles in Nature, I think, in I don't know, 2024 when it was. So this works. It's interesting. It works, and it also directly communicates the knowledge to a broader audience that might become bored when it sees a lot of hard to pronounce names of some parasites as the case.
Great. Thank you, Toyn. Yeah, and as you say, sometimes the stories that work do more work than we intend them to do, but they are also the ones that work best in other ways. I see there's another question in the chat that I missed. Bruno Host had asked a question for Marco. Can you see it, Marco?
Yes, I can see that.
If you take away the baby insects out of their nests, what are the developmental effects of lack of microbiological influence? Can they survive? And then Bruno was also asking Toyn whether someone should rewrite The Origin of Species within a context of microbiological coexistence, and whether you could comment on this. So starting with Marco.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Bruno. Yeah, that's an interesting question, but I'm not entirely sure whether I get your questions correctly. So taking out the babies or taking out the microbes from the
taking out the babies, maybe taking out the babies, Marco. So let's say they are born and you would take away time after time different ones at different time stages. Would they be influenced in different ways because of lack of contact with the microbiological elements of the parent?
Okay, it could be also the other way around, taking out the microbes, right? Okay, yeah, I see. Yeah, it very much depends on the system. So microbes, symbiotic microbes have 3 to 4 main functions have been identified. First one is the one I already mentioned, is nutrition. They provide essential nutrients. They can't extract from the environment in which they are born into. The other thing is defense against other microbes. So there is a massive, often, kind of chemical warfare going on between microorganisms. So they throw toxic microbes at each other and hamper growth, prevent sporulation, and all these different things. So that the developing insect may suffer from starvation if not the right microbes are around providing all the nutrients, or at least they are poor partners in the symbiotic relationship. And if there aren't the microbes that provide these chemical defense against other microbes, those microbes, for instance, mold fungi, right? Everyone knows mold fungi, although we use them specifically for processing food for us. Most of the mold fungi are not healthy. They produce lots of toxic metabolites, and that's why we generally avoid those moldy food items. And specific microbes can protect from these, provide protection from these detrimental microorganisms. And often it's also detoxification. So there are chemicals in the environment that would harm the host insects. And symbionts also have the function sometimes to detoxify these environmental microbes. So they may starve, they may not survive at all if, for instance, those detrimental microbes kind of win the race against the beneficial ones. The insects may simply die. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
And Toyn, do you want to address the second question that Bruno asked?
Yeah, I can shortly address this. I think there are many prime figures who already worked hard on this. I mean, Lynn Margulis made a major contribution to our understanding of the ubiquity of symbiosis in evolutionary theory. And maybe someone like Donna Haraway took this into the speculative, so going where then the wild things are when it comes to microbiological coexistence, also in the context of current evo, devo. They are telling definitely a new story that isn't quite an update to the neo-Darwinian paradigm of the 20th century. Yeah, I have a question that may I pose a question here, Leanne, to Marco Wolfs? Because it's aligned to the other question. I'm curious, I really like this article by Scott F. Gilbert, the philosopher of biology, working in evo, devo, among other things. And he has this article on a holobiont birth narrative, where he talks about that usually human birth narratives focus on this origin of a new individual, on the mother and the fetus, but instead we should tell a different story, namely that birth is nothing less than the passage from one set of symbiotic relationships to another, which kind of links my interests on narrative to your talk. What do you think of this kind of call for a new narrative? Because he's putting this call up for biologists apparently.
Okay, I think this the question relates a bit to Bruno's question whether the origin of species needs to be sort of rewritten or rethink. No, well, I mean, the role microbes and symbionts play is then just another layer that creates a selective pressure and at the same time is subject to selective pressure through the hosts. So I don't think that the basic concept of natural selection as proposed by Charles Darwin needs to be rewritten. And there has been some, and that kind of relates then to your question, the idea that, I mean, the genetic information that is encoded in one organism. So this has changed during the last, I'd say, 2 decades at least. That this is not the only source of information that makes an organism, but there are other organisms involved. But the term holobiont, which you used, often relates then to hologenome, that it is the entire set of genetic information, not just of the host animal, but also the genetic information of the microbes associated with the organism, is not necessarily a novel unit of natural selection. That's and this then refers, or the criticism of this hologenome or holobiont concept refers to some very fundamental and not new interaction outcomes between basically mutualists, right? Where everyone benefits from the presence of the other. This always needs to kind of evolutionarily negotiate it. You always have to pay something in order to get something from your host or from your symbionts. And as we know, symbiosis can also easily break up, and then the individual partners either go their individual ways without relying on each other anymore, or exactly. This can happen. This is always a conflict that exists. It's not a a symbiosis and in kind of a friendly way. You always have to pay in order to get something, and this concept is not new at all. What is new is that all the developmental processes underlying animal development and animal physiology has for quite some time been thought to be exclusively related to the information that is encoded in the DNA of the host. But during evolutionary time, lots of interdependencies have evolved so that let's say animal evolution would have looked like very different from compared to a world without microorganisms. I mean, we can't tell because microorganisms were the first, but yes, I don't think things need to be rewritten in that regard.
Thank you, Marco. And I'm sorry, I can't resist jumping in with a question here, although I've seen that Matthew also wants to ask a question, so this one will be very brief, but the word that was going through my mind during both your talks was parasite. And I'm interested in the ways you both avoid the word parasite and why you might do that. So for Marco, I'm wondering, is the idea that the concept of parasitism at all useful, or is it actually something that you might find counterproductive given the relationships that you're examining? And for Toyn, I'm wondering what overlaps you see between the trickster and the parasite, since the parasite, before being a biological concept, was a character in Greek comedy and one who was always on the threshold, always negotiating the passage between the social house and the outside world. So there's a lot of similarities. So perhaps Marco first. Do you use this word?
Yes, of course. It absolutely makes sense from an ecological perspective, because parasitism or predatory behavior always refers to the net interaction outcome between organisms of different species. And if there is, on average, a negative impact on one of the interaction partners and the positive impact on the other interaction partners, as long as the parasite fulfilling its life cycle does not rely on the death of its host, it's a parasite by definition. And here I think it's again interesting that that also all these different kind of interaction that one can observe between organisms of different species can kind of move from one interaction type into another, turn into another. When the environment changes, a mutualistic interaction may easily turn into a parasitic one, so that one starts cheating, because we always want something from our interaction partner, right? But in turn, we have to always give something. But if there is the opportunity for some reasons not to provide that return service, we will do that. And then we are not a mutualist anymore, but a parasite. So this is definitely a term in ecology that is fairly often used, yes, and just normal, I'd say. Yeah.
Thanks. Toyn?
Well, I mean, the figure of the parasites definitely serves as an emblem of these kind of societal and biological anxieties surrounding collective life, relationality, and the dependence. And in this way, the parasite is much like the trickster figure, a disruptor of categories and of intuitive ontologies, common sense ontologies. But the parasite also, it needs a body politic of boundedness. There is an organism under attack perceived as distinct from a lurking environment of threats, and then through metaphors of attack, evasion, defense, it responds to and naturalizes anxieties of, for example, conflicts between nation states, societal ideologies, in this kind of way. So given that there is no such thing as a parasite, only relationships that are parasitic, as Marco Wolfs pointed out, I indeed think that the parasite has come to an end, at least not for biology, but for a useful biological imagination in this way.
Interesting.
I use it nevertheless, so that's a note to myself.
Okay, thank you. Matthew, my apologies for making you wait. What was your question? Oh, you wrote it in the chat. Sorry, I've just seen it.
Yes, but I can also speak it aloud, maybe with my words. So this is I guess, a question for Toyn. And just thinking about, like, I really enjoyed your talk. Connections I'd see going back to even like just the classic War of the Worlds and things like that. Lots of examples. But so the way at least I understood it is if microbes and tricksters are both kind of representing what's beyond our understanding of the rules and kind of and how we think about biology working or society or whatever narrative is working. But then this is also something we want to be conserving. How do we meaningfully do that when these are things that we can't, that we kind of, at least the way this literature is approaching it, we can't know how to engage with them in advance because they're breaking whatever rules, the rules of engagement we think they are. And in particular, I mean, obviously there's the literature reality divide, but does your literature provide maybe some useful guidance on how we should approach thinking about maybe even microbial conservation in the real world?
That's a great question. I mean, the danger with these kind of structures, narrative structures, is of course the problem of othering, that microbes remain the quintessential other, except instead of accepting them into our common sense ontology. So I think that this is a question about the function of defamiliarization, or how these novels or these weird fiction like Jeff Vandermeer, how it either contributes or just jumps onto like a feeling we have, like this weirdness of nature, without also going into that abyss, into the deep, like a real. I don't know what my opinions on that, but I think it's a very legitimate question. If they really offer, if they plunge the reader into this weird life, or if they stay at the abyss and say, well, this is very weird, and we are going into that weirdness without fully accepting these weird organisms for what they are, and for the specifics that they like, that they be. This is a legitimate question that I don't have an answer, but I think these are, sorry.
No worries. I just wanted to hear your thoughts, so thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the question, Matthew, even if we don't have a solution. Would anyone else like to jump in? We've been very efficient with time. We have 90 seconds left. No, it can be more than 90 seconds, but has everyone been able to ask their questions? Okay, looks good. This was brilliant. Thank you so much, Marco and Toyn. I really enjoyed the questions that you left unanswered, as well as the questions that you answered. I'm going to be haunted by carrion insects, but in a good way. So thank you very much. Michael, do you want to say a word about the recording? Just, we wanted to tell everyone that we've recorded this session, and that we will make this recording available online on the BioYUFE network. We hope this is all right for everyone. And yes, that's it basically, Michael.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, thanks to you, Lilian, for sharing this webinar with us. It's a biocriticism webinar jointly produced with BioYUFE. And because it's recorded, I stated at the beginning, We're going to put this onto the BioYUFE YouTube channel. So if you feel that you want to revisit this topic, or if you want to make it accessible to your students, maybe use it in your teaching if you are in higher education, then that might be useful to use. And on the screen now, you see the advert again for the upcoming BioYUFE webinar on the war in Ukraine, impacts on the environment. There's a QR code there for you. If you want to get onto the link, then you can register from there. So it would be lovely to see as many as possible at this upcoming webinar. Then another one in June on green exercise and mental health. So it was a pleasure sharing this with you, Lilia. Thank you very much. Yeah, I have no more to say other than thanking everybody who's attended and got engaged with this topic. Thanks to the speakers, of course, Toyin and Marco. Thanks for sharing your time with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael and Liam, for organizing this.
Been a pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Have a good Friday and a good weekend.